This is the software portion of the laser training for the Sun City Woodshop. In this video, we will go over the basic features of the Lightburn software. There are many more advanced videos available on YouTube. Just do a search for Lightburn. Laser engraving and cutting can be used to enhance your handcrafted wood projects or as a tool to create projects such as boxes, signs, ornaments, etc. Now, let's begin. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Lightburn workspace. So in the middle we have our actual space where we're going to be doing our designing. This grid represents the size of the laser bed. If you want to zoom in or zoom out, there are buttons on the toolbar up at the top, the plus and the minus buttons to zoom in or zoom out, or you can easily zoom in or out with the scroll button, the middle button on your mouse. You can also drag the window around, the workspace window around, by clicking down on the middle scroll button and dragging it wherever you would like to place it. So if you wanted to get in and get some close detail work, and you wanted to, say for instance, I wanted to get in close detail over here on this side of my window, then I would just simply drag my workspace till I got to the space where I wanted to zoom into, and I can zoom in as close as I would like. The next thing we're going to talk about is selecting objects. So you will select objects using the arrow button. Make sure you click on the arrow button if another tool is selected. And you have two options. You can drag the mouse pointer from left to right, and it will select everything that is fully enclosed in the red rectangle that I have drawn. If I do not cover all of the objects, so say for instance I start here and drag across, it is only going to select the two objects that are fully enclosed in the rectangle that I drew. However, I can drag from right to left, and as long as the rectangle that I draw crosses at least one area of the objects that are drawn, it will select them. So if you notice, when I clicked on drug my rectangle, I didn't fully select any of those objects, but yet when I release my mouse button, all of the objects are selected. So those are two methods of how you can select objects that are drawn on your workspace. There are several buttons on the toolbar that will assist us when we are manipulating our images. We're going to take each of these little segments individually. So the first one we're going to talk about is group and ungroup, which are right up here on the toolbar. The group is designated by, it looks like, three little people, and the ungroup is by a single person. So I'm using this pie as an example. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in close to it, and I'm going to use my selection tool and select it. And as you notice, the handles are all around the object, and all of the lines are moving, which means that all of those objects are part of one image. If I go up to the toolbar, you will also notice that the group selection, the three little people, is grayed out. So that also indicates to me that this object is grouped. So if I click on the single-headed person, it will ungroup the object, and you notice that the lines changed. They're a little bit longer rather than the short one, so that lets me know that it's functioning differently. When I click off of it and click back onto it and just click anywhere on the object, you will notice that now I'm selecting each little piece individually. So I'm going to take out all of these little pie vents. I want to use this image, but I don't want the pie vents. So I'm going to, using my selection method that we discussed in the previous section, I'm going to drag from right to left, and it's going to give me the green rectangle, and I don't have to cover all of the objects. I just need to cover part of them, and when I release, all of those objects will be selected, and then I'm going to press the delete button on my keyboard, and that is going to unselect those items. So now I have my pie without the vents. So I want to go ahead and regroup it, because if for some reason I move it and some of these elements don't get moved with it, it can cause a problem. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back over with my rectangular selection tool from right to left, select everything, and go back up to the toolbar, and I'm going to click on Group. That is now going to group my selection. The next tool we're going to talk about is the alignment toolbar, alignment tools. So they're going to be up here at the top. It's going to look like a bullseye, and then there's two buttons that to allow for vertical alignment and for horizontal alignment. So I'm going to show you how that works here. So we're going to select the item that we want to align, and we will select that first, and then the last thing we will select is the object that we want to anchor. So if I wanted to center this Lightburn in the into the center of this box, I'm going to click Lightburn, and then I'm going to press down the control button on my keyboard and click the outside line that will anchor that box, and then I can go up here and I can hit the bullseye, which will center the Lightburn in the center of that box. I could also just take Lightburn, click it, and click my rectangle last, and I can choose if I wanted to align it left, or if I wanted to align it right, or also if I wanted top align or bottom align. So there's a couple of different options that you have there with the alignment. The next topic we're going to cover is mirroring. So we have a vertical and a horizontal mirroring tool on the toolbar. They are right next to the ungroup. So if I have this object here that I want to mirror, I can just come up here, select it, make sure you have your selection tool selected, select the object, and then click on the mirror vertically, and it will flip it around. If I wanted to mirror it horizontally, I would do the same thing with the button right next to it. This is another example, mirroring horizontally. You can also rotate objects. I'm going to come down to the seagull down in the bottom of my workspace, and I'm going to select it. And if you notice the selection handles, the four corners have a little curved arrow. If I click on that arrow and just rotate it, I can rotate it however I would like. There is also a rotate area up here in this toolbar where you would put a percentage in if you wanted to rotate it very specifically 90% or 80%. Where I find this rotation comes in handy is if you're cutting out several objects and you want to nest them really closely together to allow for less use of material, you can do that. So real quickly, I'm just going to Control C to copy the seagull, and then I'm going to click off and do a Control V to duplicate it. And I'm going to rotate this second seagull, and I'm going to put him in as close to this one as I can. The laser curve is very, very tight, so you can get pretty close in and not have to worry about, as long as the lines aren't overlapping, you should be safe. Get it in really close. So now I have those two items nested, whereas if I had them side by side or one on top of the other, it would take up a little bit more space. So that comes in handy if you're looking to reduce the amount of waste on your material that you are engraving or cutting. Next, we're going to talk about drawing lines and shapes. I did want to mention, I failed to mention this earlier. As I had mentioned, this grid area is our workspace, which is the size of the laser bed. And you'll notice I've gone outside of those lines, but this is just strictly for the purposes of being able to present this information. Your material can be no larger than 30 wide by 15 long. There are some exceptions. We do have some pass-through doors, which we will talk about during the hands-on training, but you do need to stick with those restrictions whenever you are engraving or cutting, unless you do some special manipulation to your object, which is a little more advanced, and there are some YouTube videos on how to do that. So I just wanted to make that clear since I did not mention that prior. So the first thing I want to do is I want to draw a line. So I'm going to come over here. This left-hand side toolbar, all of our drawing and manipulating objects. So I'm going to click on the pencil, and I'm going to click where I want to start drawing my line, and I'm going to drag across, and I'm going to click a second time. If I do not click the escape button to stop the line drawing, it will continue drawing lines. So I can keep clicking, clicking, and clicking until I have drawn all of my lines, and then once I press the escape button, my lines are no longer drawn. Notice I can start a new one, but that particular segment is done being drawn. So let me delete that little extra piece that I just put in there accidentally. And we're going to talk about drawing rectangles and squares. So our rectangle tool is right underneath the pencil, and we just would click from left to right and draw a rectangle. We can also draw a perfect square if we hold down the shift button and drag. It will draw a perfect square. The same thing with the circle and ellipse. I select it right below the square. If I just draw it out, it's going to draw an ellipse, but if I hold down the shift key and draw, and I'm clicking on the left mouse button whenever I'm dragging, it will draw a perfectly symmetrical circle. The other thing is you have the option when you're resizing objects. You can put in, if I wanted to resize this rectangle, I can drag on any of the selection handles on the corner, and it will resize it proportionately. If I wanted to make more of a rectangle out of it, I would just click on one of the selection handles on the side, and it will draw it out. If I had a specific size that I wanted to make this object, I would come up here to the width and the height, and I would type in those dimensions. This lock represents the aspect ratio. So if you want it to be perfectly sized like a square or a circle, you would want it locked. If you want to be able to size it to your specific dimensions, you would want to unlock it, and then you would put in the height and the width that you would like your object. So I'm going to use this bird here in the bottom just to show what a difference that would make. So if I click on select him, and then click on the any one of the corner selection handles and drag out, notice he's proportionately resized. Whereas if I click on the side, it's going to drag it out, and it's not going to be in proportion, so it doesn't look very nice. So you want to keep that in mind whenever you are resizing objects. The next topic we're going to cover is convert to path. This allows you to manipulate projects to create different shapes. I have this spatula here that I had traced and scanned and brought into Lightburn, but it didn't come out really clear, so I thought I could draw a rectangle around it and manipulate the rectangle to follow the shape of the spatula. So we do that first by converting the object we want to manipulate to a path, and then editing nodes, which I'll talk about in a little greater detail next. So I'm going to select the rectangle and then right-click and choose Convert to Path. Alternatively, you can go up to the Edit menu at the top of the screen and click Select Convert to Path from that menu. So now that I have it converted to a path, I can actually go in and edit the nodes to give it the shape that I want to give it. So I'm going to zoom in down here on this one that I've already started working on. And I'm going to click on the line. And this is the Edit Nodes tool. It's the sixth object down on the left toolbar. And notice when I hover over it, there's a little help menu that gives you the shortcuts to editing nodes. These are also found in the Lightburn documentation, so you may want to consider printing them out and keeping them handy because they do come in handy. So now that I have selected that I want to edit nodes, I have these little boxes, these little brown boxes that are the nodes, and I can drag this node down and get it close to my shape. And same thing here. I can do the same thing and keep working my way around. Now, I'm going to pull this out a little bit just so you can see the line a little bit better. But, you know, that's a straight line. So we don't want a straight line. We want a curved line. So if I hover over this node and I press the S button on my keyboard, it converts it to a smooth shape. And now I have these handles that will allow me to manipulate the shape however I want to do it to make it more fitting for what I'm trying to do. If I need to insert a node, I'm going to just come over here to this blank section right here, and I'm going to hover my cursor over the spot on the line where I want to insert the node, and I'm going to tap the I button on my keyboard. And now, as you notice, I have another node there that I can edit. So that's the real basics of node editing, how to insert it, how to make one smooth, and how to move it around. And I could eventually get all the way around the spatula and have it mimic the same shape of the spatula. It does take time. Editing nodes is not something that can be done quickly, but it's essential to learn how to do it, as you'll understand why in the next video. There are many uses for editing nodes, but I'm just going to demonstrate a very simple one here. In this drawing, I have the seagull that I want to convert to just a basic outline. Sometimes when you bring things in from Google Images, you'll get these broken lines that need to be kind of cleaned up, or you'll get what we call open shapes, like right here, these lines don't meet together. If the shapes are not closed, you're going to get an error on Lightburn whenever you try to run your project. So what I'm going to do first is let me go over to this particular object, and I'm going to ungroup it first, and then I can come in here and select some of these items to clean it up. I'm ultimately going to get to this image over here, but I'm just showing you what I'm doing. I'm just deleting some of these little pieces. Now, if you will notice, these lines kind of all run together. So I have this whole piece, including the inside, as a line. So I'm going to have to edit nodes, which I'm not going to go into detail here, to end this line, get this middle part out and this part out by deleting nodes. There are more specific videos on YouTube that will give you more detailed instructions on it. It's just not suitable to go into such detail for this training. So what I'm going to do though is I do want to show you how to close a gap. So if you have a object that you're trying to, especially if you're trying to fill it and it says the object is open, you need to find where the lines don't meet and close it up. So I'm going to zoom in really closely here and select this item right here. I'm going to come over to Edit Nodes, and you can see now I have all of my nodes along the outline. And I'm going to drag this endpoint over here to meet this line, and just by doing that I have joined it and I have closed the object. I could do the same thing here and make all of this one piece. See if I can quickly demonstrate that. I'm going to type a D to delete here, delete and break that up, and I'm going to delete right in here also, and I'm going to bring this one down to meet here, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Basically, I'm trying to get rid of this line right here, so it'll be just one nice good outline. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to break this line up. Again, I'm just pressing the delete button, and I'm going to drag this one over to meet this line. I have to zoom in really closely to get that, and now that object is joined, and I can come back to my selection tool and delete this piece right here in the middle by just pressing the delete key on my keyboard. So it's the difference when I'm deleting the nodes, I'm pressing the D, the letter D. When I'm deleting objects, I'm pressing the delete key. So the other thing is I need to redraw this beak, because as I stated earlier, when you bring images in, sometimes they come in as these little broken pieces. And the easiest way, in my opinion, is to redraw it. So I basically drew a rectangle and started some manipulation on it. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to select the red rectangle, and I'm going to go into Edit Nodes, and I'm going to show you how you can make this look a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to put my pointer in a spot where I want to insert a node. I'm going to type the letter I, press the letter I on the keyboard for insert a node. Again, these shortcuts are on the Lightburn tutorial information you can find online. And when you hover over the edit nodes, it also does a little pop-up. My screen capture software does not show it, so you can't see it, but when you hover over it on your machine, you will see, and it gives you a brief little list of what they do. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to insert a node here, and I'm going to drag it down, and I can make them smooth. I can press S to smooth them, and then I'm going to get these little handles that will allow me to curve the line how I want. Probably be easier to see if I deleted this piece of blue here. So now you can see I took that straight line and made it a nice smooth line. So those are the kind of things that you're going to be using editing nodes with, and you're going to find that you're going to need them more often than you think. So it's something that you want to get some proficiency with. Our next tool we're going to talk about is the Offset Shapes tool. This tool resides in the toolbar on the left-hand side about the center, and it looks like a large O. As I'm demonstrating this, again, there's going to be another pop-up window which will not show on my screen that I'm saving, but I will pop in what it looks like on the video, the final video, so you can see it. But you won't see the adjustments that I'm making. You will just see what the box looks like. So just be aware of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Lightburn text and I'm going to outline it to look like this Lightburn text here. So we're going to touch on the cuts and layers in greater detail. But what I want to point out to you is, as I'm designing this text, my blue layer, which these are all the layers down here at the bottom, and you can set them to whatever you want them to be, is what I call is my fill layer. I always use the blue layer 1 when I'm doing engraving. And my red layer, which is a outline, I always use for my cut layer. It can either draw a line or it can cut, and that's going to be determined based on the power and speed settings you set the laser. Again, I'll go into greater detail, but I just wanted you to understand the difference between what the blue filled text was and what the red outline text is. So in this instance, if I were to do this Lightburn, it's just going to engrave the word Lightburn. If I came down here and ran this object, it would engrave the Lightburn text, but it would also cut out along the red line as I have indicated it to do so. So it's very simple to offset and create this outline. I'm just going to make sure my selection tool is active. I'm going to click on Lightburn, and I'm going to go over to the Offset Shapes tool, and the little box that you'll see on the screen will give me some options as to whether I want to do it outward or inward or in both directions. And then I have an offset distance box where I can change the distance between the offset and the actual text that I've typed. So I'm going to kind of adjust it about where I want it, and I'm going to click OK. So now I have my outline, but what it has done now is it's reversed it, and it's made the distance between the text and the new outline that I drew as being engraved rather than the text. So it's very simple to fix. I'm going to just click on the outline that I just added, and I'm going to come down to my cuts and layers, and I'm going to change that to my red layer. And now it is set to cut around the text. Same thing with this box over here. If I wanted to, say, have some text over here in the box on the bottom and put a nice frame around it and then cut it out, I would start initially with a simple rectangle, and I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to go to the Offset Shapes, and I'm going to set my distance, how far I want the engraving to be, and I'm going to, I did outward and I set my distance. I'm going to click OK. So now I have a nice little frame. So the next thing I want to do, so I can keep these two elements together, because what I ultimately want to happen is for the laser engraver to fill between the two lines that I've created. The laser engraver curve is set, so in other words, you cannot make something bold like you would in a word processor. You have to offset it to thicken around it, like in this case, this frame. You create another line, and between the two you set it for fill, and it will fill the line. So I'm going to group these two items together. So now it will be considered one item, and now I select on the rectangle and I come back over to the Offset Shapes, and I'm going to go back outward again, and I'm going to click, leave it the same distance and click OK. But now I'm going to come back and set the new rectangle that I've just offset to my red layer. So now it's going to cut. So now I've basically achieved the same thing as I did down here with this rectangle on the top. So you'll find many uses for it. It can come in handy, like I said, especially if you want to do inlays. You can do some nice inlays with it. So hopefully you will find some use of that tool. Now we're going to talk about the cuts and layers, and these are the controls where we're going to tell the laser how fast to move the laser head and also at what power to burn. So this window over here, our cuts and layers, is where we set all of these things up. As I mentioned to you in the previous video, this is just my personal preference. It just helps to pick a color and stick with it all the time. I always use the 02 red layer when I'm cutting. I use the 03 green layer when I want to draw a line, and I use the 01 blue layer whenever I'm engraving. So I have those indicated here, but you can set whatever layer you want to do, whether you want to fill or line, it's completely up to you. So when I came here and I typed in Lightburn and I selected the blue layer, over here in the Cuts and Layers window, it is going to tell me at what speed and power that object will be processed. And the same with the green line and the red line. We can arrange these. You always want your cut line to be last. You don't want to cut it out first. You always want to cut it out last. And this orange layer, just because I wanted a different color text to put this information on the screen, it's really just there just for show, I guess you can say. But if I were processing this file, I would only be using the blue, the green, and the red. So with that said, I could take this orange layer and I could set the output to off, and it's going to kind of dim it so you know that it's not being processed. And we also have some tool layers at the end. You'll notice T1 and T2. Those two layers never process anything to the laser. They're just simply that, a tool layer. And in fact, before we had the tool layers, that's when I used other layers. If I wanted to like make a note, or if I wanted to draw an outline box, say the size of my material, I would use a layer I'm not going to process to do that. So let's talk about powers and speed. So we come over here. I've got all of my layers set. I'm going to come over to the fill layer and I'm going to double click, and that is going to open the cut settings editor screen where we can set the speed and the max power and the minimum power. So the speed, when you're engraving, you're going to use a high speed, somewhere around 325 or 350, with I think 350 being the max. You never ever want to use a power over 80% or 85%. It will cause the constant wear and tear, will put too much wear and tear on the laser tube. So we never ever run the laser tube at 100%. So with that being said, if I'm engraving, I need the laser head to move fast. My power is going to really be dependent on the material I'm engraving on, how deep I want it, how dark I want it. If I'm going to be filling it with epoxy, you might want it deep. And if you're not, you still may want it deep because you want to achieve a rich dark color. For example, if I was engraving on maple, I would probably use a speed of 350 and a power of anywhere between 40 and 50, a maximum power. Your minimum power, you'll just always want to, as a rule of thumb, set it at 10 less than your maximum power, 10% less than your maximum power. If I were cutting through, first off, let me mention that the laser is not designed to cut through thick wood. You want to use it for thinner projects if you're cutting. It may take multiple passes if you're doing something, over 1/4 of an inch. I personally don't use it for cutting. If I'm going to be doing a thick piece, I'll cut my piece on the table saw or on the bandsaw and then bring it into the laser room to be engraved. But your cut layer, which in my case is the red layer that I've selected, is you're going to move the laser head at a slower speed and a higher power. So for instance, when the laser material, the thin material that we have in the laser room that you can purchase to make your projects on, you would want to run the speed at around 15 and the power between 40 and 50. And that will give you a nice good cut on that thin plywood. If I were drawing a line, which I have set at my green layer, I usually do that also at a fast speed, 200, 300, and maybe like 70 power, 60 power, because I'm going really fast. Speed and power are just something that you're going to have to get used to. It's really hard to say there's a prescribed method because it is going to depend on the wood. We do have some samples in the laser room with some speed and power blocks on different materials that you can look at and kind of get an idea. But I always test my project first on a test piece of material to make sure that I'm achieving the look that I want, because you don't want to put your final project in there and end up it not being dark enough, because once you move it out of the laser bed, you're not going to be able to place it back in the exact same position and re-laser right over it. If you don't touch it, you can, but I always like to run a test piece just to make sure. So that kind of pretty much sums up how the cuts and layers work. We have, 29 different layers, so you can do things at different power if you wanted to achieve some shading variation. So there's a plethora of things you can do, and again, there are more videos online that can do a far better job of explaining it than I am here. So I suggest that you really immerse yourself in YouTube videos and learn the more in-depth workings of the software. Before we move on from cuts and layers, upon my review of the previous segment, I realized that I failed to mention a couple of things. First off, the window that I told you would pop open whenever you double click on any of the layers here, you don't really need to open the window. We have the settings right here in this little small window. I just like it because it's easier to see rather than using the little small section here, but you can do the same thing, and as you can see, my blue layer is set at 350 speed and 60 power with a minimum of 50. The one thing that I failed to mention was your interval. You want your interval to be around 0.06, and I do have another presentation slide that we'll go into that will demonstrate it a little bit better for you. But you want your line interval to be small because that will close the gap in between the laser passes, and it'll give you a better engraved image. The other thing I did not mention is I was telling you should put the red line last, and I didn't tell you how to do that. So let's say, for instance, if you look on my screen, if I wanted to move this blue layer down, I would select on the blue layer and then come over here on the right hand side, and there are some arrows, and I can move it down or move it up. If I wanted to completely delete a layer, I can delete it by clicking on the trash button. So that's another place that you can change it. Like I said, I've just kind of gotten in the habit of using the other screen because it is a little bit larger and it's easier to see, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with making your adjustments right here in the small cuts and layers window that is displayed in the Lightburn screen. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the line interval as discussed in the previous section. Whenever you're engraving, as I said, the laser curve does not change, but we do have control over the space in between the passes. I'll be able to better demonstrate that when I show you the difference between these two A's that I have set to be engraved. If you will notice, I have set this gold layer at an interval of 0.5, and you can see if I click on my gold layer here, you will see my interval is 0.5, and I have my pink layer set in an interval of 0.06, which is what I discussed previously that is recommended. When I preview the screen of what this is going to look like. So if I come up here to the top toolbar, looks like a little computer screen, and I click on it, we will see an example of what the finished product would look like. You could also consider it a virtual laser. You can set it to look at how the laser is going to run. When you hit play, it will show you all of the laser moves. In fact, it's really a good idea, a good practice to review it every time you create a project. I can't tell you how many times I have caught that by mistake I did not have my cut layer set to last, so you can catch those type of mistakes. But I'm going to pop in a screenshot on this particular segment so you'll see it, what it would look like. And if you look at the difference between the interval of the 0.5 and the 0.06, you will see that the 0.5 has a far cleaner, the 0.06 has a far cleaner letter than the 0.5. So you're going to get a better engraving when your interval is lower. So that's the main thing that you want to remember. I always stick with 0.06. It works beautifully, and I've found no reason to do anything other than that. The next thing we're going to discuss are the weld and Boolean operations. These are considered modifier tools. So if you go to the Lightburn documentation to modifier tools, there is a very good, very descriptive section on these tools and how they can be used. It goes in greater detail than what I'm going to go into in this video. So I suggest that you go to the Lightburn software documentation and search for modifier tools. So the buttons for these tools are over here on the left toolbar in this little section where I'm moving my cursor. The first thing we're going to talk about is the weld tool. So I have drawn out 3 boxes here, and I'm going to click and select them all, and what it's going to do is merge all of those together or weld them into one object. So when I click on the weld button, it takes those 3 objects and turns it into one. Union, difference, and intersection are the 3 Boolean operations. Union will join these 2 objects together. So I have selected them, and I'm going to come over to the tool. It looks like this over here on the left hand side of the toolbar, and I'm going to, it says Boolean Union. I'm going to click on it, and that's going to join those objects. The difference, I'm going to first select the square, and then holding down the control key, click on the circle. And when I select the difference tool, what that's going to do is that is going to subtract the second object from the first. And then lastly, we have the intersection. So I have these 2 objects drawn. I'm going to click on the second one, and I'm just going to move it over. And when I select this and use the intersection tool, the only part that will be kept is this inner diamond. Again, the software documentation on the Lightburn gives some better examples of this, so I definitely suggest that you visit that. These tools can come in handy when you're trying to create your own artwork, or if you have 2 objects that you want to manipulate. So now I'm going to go over here on the left hand side and select intersection, and as you can see, it only picked up where those 2 items intersected. The next topic we're going to cover is tracing an image. So you can bring an image in, a picture in from the internet, bring it into Lightburn in either of the two methods I'm getting ready to show you, and you can engrave it as is. But if you have a file, like say for instance this flower, I found it, I like it, but it's got some information in the center of it, and I need to clean it up, and I want to cut it. I don't want to engrave it. So I need to do some manipulations to the file. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to convert it from a bitmap to a vector. So my bitmaps are going to be your JPEGs, PNGs, BMPs, TIFFs, and GIFs. They are going to be pixel-based with no smooth curves. So you're going to have kind of little jagged edges. But once we convert it into a vector file, the vector file is a mathematical equation with smooth curves, and it will also turn it into something we can edit. So first, let's just discuss how to import the image from a file. So I already have a file saved on my computer, so I'm going to go up to the menu at the top and click on File, and then Import, and then I'm going to select my flower and click Open. So now I have my flower in my workspace. Next, to copy and paste an image from the web, I already went out to Google and found an image, and I saved it to my Windows clipboard. So all I have to do now is right-click and select Paste, and it brings the image in for me. So that's two real easy ways to bring your images in to Lightburn. So now let's take a look at this flower bitmap that I have down here. So if I wanted to cut this out, I need just one single line that I can turn into a cut line on the outside of this flower. So what I'm going to do is I have it selected. I'm going to right-click and go down to Trace Image. This is also under the, I believe it's the Edit menu, but I tend to right-click because it's so much easier. So now I'm going to zoom in, and where it has these pink lines, that is what is being traced. So you can adjust that by using these slider bars down here. It really just takes a lot of practice. I do recommend that you look at the Lightburn documentation online specific to image trace, because it does give you a great amount of information on different manipulations you can do with the slider bars, and a lot greater detail than I can provide here. So now I'm going to just click OK, and it is going to bring my traced image into Lightburn. It is a little hard to see, but I can tell that my little red lines of my traced image are there. And when I click on it and move it out, it's a little bit easier to see. I'm just going to show you real quick. Go back to Trace Image. If you did not want to keep the original image after you do the trace, there is a button down here that says Delete Image After Trace, and then when I click OK, now you notice the original image is gone. So there may be instances where you want to keep the original image, but if you don't, you just click it off and everything will be, it'll be a lot easier to work with. I'm going to zoom in here, get a little closer, and I'm going to select my object. You may not be able to tell, but I have little dots and dashes moving around all of the red lines. So that tells me that this flower is grouped. I know also because this outer layer is a separate layer than the inner layer. However, they're all moving together. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up here, and I'm going to ungroup. So now I can click on the outer or the inner line, whichever one I decide I want to keep, and delete the other one. So now I have, that one doesn't look too good. Let me delete the inner one.
Okay, so now I just have the outline, and then I can come in here using the selection methods we discussed earlier in the video and select the text in the middle and then simply delete it. So that's just a quick, easy way of how you can do some editing. There are also some videos online by third party, not to Lightburn, that do a good job talking about image tracing, so you may want to look at that as well.
The next topic are columnar and circular arrays. So if you're doing a repetitious file, I'm going to use example of business cards, and you want to do several columns and several rows, the array tool is going to be the best tool for you. So you don't have to literally copy and paste each one of those. So I have drawn out a rectangle here. And I'm going to come down over here on the left hand side to this. It will look like this is a larger view of the tool, just below the Boolean operations that we just worked with. And I'm going to click on it, and it is going to give me a pop-up window, which I apologize that you cannot see, but it gives you some options to set the number of columns and rows and spaces between it. I will pop in with a little screenshot of it so you can at least see that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select 2 or 3 columns. As you notice, when I clicked on the columns, it goes ahead and populates them, and I'll click on a couple of rows. And I want to put a little bit of spacing in between the columns, so I'm just increasing the X spacing. And there's some other manipulation settings that you can do in the pop-up box, so you can look at those a little bit closer. But that's just a quick, easy way to duplicate multiple items. And then you can do a circular array. So I'm going to take this, my cute little flower, and I want to put multiple copies around the circle. So you want to select your center object last. So I'm going to first select the flower, and then I'm going to, holding down the control key, click on the circle. And now I'm going to go over to the circular array tool, which is right under the grid array. And again, it's going to give me a pop-up box. And basically it's going to, there's a setting for the number of copies that I can increase or decrease. And every time I click an increase or decrease, it's going to show me a real-time picture of what it's going to look like. So there's some pretty neat things you can do with that. Once I'm satisfied, I'm just going to click OK and get out of that window. And I have created my own artwork just based on using the circular array. Now we're going to move on to entering text. Our text tool is the large bold A over here on the left-hand side toolbar. I'm going to click on it, and if you notice, when I move into my grid area and I click, I have a crosshair, kind of like you do in any word processor that you would be typing into. So I'm going to just type some text. I'll type my name, and I'm going to use the switch over to my select tool. So I have selected the object, and I have a couple of different manipulations I can do. First, of course, would be to resize it, and I can do that easily by grasping any of the corner handles and resizing it proportionately. Or if I wanted it a specific height, I could type that height up here in the toolbar at the top. Say if I want it to be 2.25 inches. I will type that and press enter. I have my measurements in inches. We can change that to millimeters by just simply clicking on this button right here that I'm pointing to in the toolbar. I prefer to work in inches. So I've got my height, We can also do some spacing, some horizontal and vertical spacing adjustment. So horizontal spacing, I'm going to select Learning Lightburn, and I'm going to come back up to this toolbar next to where I did height, and I'm just going to use the arrows to increase or decrease the space between my text, my letters, and I can do some vertical adjustments, putting a little bit space between the lines, or if I want to tighten it up. So those are a couple of different ways you can manipulate your text. If you want to choose a different font, to the left of the height measurement is a drop-down box, and it will have all the fonts listed. These will be fonts that are installed in Windows on the computer that you are currently using. So if you don't find a font here that you would have at home, that is because it has not been installed in the Windows environment on the computers at the woodshop.
Now we're going to take a look at the preview window. The preview window gives us an idea of what the object is going to look like once we engrave it, and we can look at some settings that will help us to make adjustments if needed in our speeds and power. I'm going to click on what looks like the little computer screen at the top, across the top toolbar. And as you can see, I have my object created. This outer line is a cut line, and then everything else is engraved. And if you notice down at the bottom, we have some items we can select. First off, we can actually play the image, which will show us how the laser is going to actually process the job. So I'm going to go ahead and click play, and you'll see, because I have over here on the right hand side in my cuts and layers, I have the fill going first, which was my blue layer, and then lastly my line. These other two are just for the text that I had on the page, so they're inconsequential at this point. But as you can see, it did kind of a little display of how the laser is going to engrave this object. We can slow down the playback speed. There's a little sliding bar. If you notice, it's the first item down here at the bottom. We can also show traversal moves, which will let, when you're running when you're processing items on the scan on the laser, it's going to overscan. So the laser head needs time. When it gets to the end of the line here, it's got to slow down before it turns around and comes back. And it's hard to think of it slowing down because it moves so quickly, but it does have to go past the text and come back to start the next line that it's going to be engraving. So that's your traversal move. So you can see how far back and forth the laser is going. It may be helpful if you're engraving some items to engrave them on separate layers. It may make it faster. So let's say, for instance, if I wanted to engrave the name Rachel all at once and then engrave the stethoscope second, and then the text at the bottom thirdly. In this particular case, it may not make a lot of difference, but I'm just mentioning that is you may want to look at that. Sometimes breaking up your engraving into different objects, it might help with the speed. So let's talk about that, or the time. The total time is estimated at 7 minutes and 57 seconds. Lightburn does not calculate, it doesn't really know the laser speed. So basically this time is going to be off. If it says 7 to 8 minutes, you can almost count on at least maybe possibly 12 to 15. Just know that it's not going to exactly be the 8 minutes. It's a good guesstimation, but Lightburn is unable to calculate that down to the minute and the second because of it depends on our laser. So that's the preview window, and it gives you a good look. The other thing I like using the preview window for is because you can always double check. When you click the play button, you can always double check and make sure, okay, my engraving is processing first, and then my line is processing second. Because it's easy when you're building the file to forget about the order, putting these in the appropriate order. But if you always preview it and play it, then you can review it before you send it to the laser and make any adjustments that need to be made. After reviewing the previous segment that I recorded on preview, I realized there was one other thing I wanted to mention to you. So I've taken all the other extraneous information off of that page and just left myself with my object here. And I want you to notice how my green origin, which is supposed to be in the center because I have the job origin set as the center, it is not in the center of my object. What that tells me is more than likely I have a little small artifact somewhere in this grid area that I can't necessarily see. And it does happen. You don't realize that you may have the square or the circle selected, and next thing you know, you've clicked something and you've added one and you don't even realize that you've done it. So there's a couple of ways to spot it. The easiest way is to come up to the preview, and if I turn on the traversal moves, you will notice it's going all the way here and then it comes all the way down here because there's a little tiny dot right here. So if I zoom in, you will see the little dot right there on my screen. And when I click on it, you'll see all the little handles around it. I could also just click select, draw a selection box in the open area, and that will also help me find it. But probably the easiest way to do it is to go up to the preview window and hit the traversal moves, and then you'll see where it is on your screen. Then once I delete that little artifact and I go back to preview, I only have the object that I'm wishing to engrave. So hopefully that will help you if you have an incident similar to that. The next topic we're going to discuss is the job origin. So over here in our laser window on the right-hand side, you'll notice there is a job origin, and there's 9 circles with a selected circle in the center of those 9. So basically the job origin is the starting position, which is one of these 9 possible positions, which will determine where on your drawing the laser will start. I always recommend using the center origin because it's easier to find. So for instance, if I have a piece of wood that I'm going to be engraving on, I would probably start with drawing a square or rectangle, whatever the size of the wood is, and making that a tool layer, and then laying out whatever I want to put in it. You will notice when I click and move this rectangle that I've drawn, the green dot goes with it because that is the center of my object. So it relates to this setting over here. If I were to change it to the upper left corner, notice how the green dot has moved to the upper left corner. So when you get to the laser, if you have it set on the center point and you have a specific size piece of wood, if you're going to be engraving on a scrap piece of wood and you're just going to kind of eyeball it, this doesn't really matter. But if you have, say, a plaque that you're going to be engraving on, you need to be able to line up a starting point so that your text or whatever you're engraving on it comes out where you expect it to on the board, and it's straight and centered. So if I come in and I say I wanted to add some art, and I'm just going to choose a circle, and I'm going to add the art to my object, and I'm going to center this all up. So that green dot has remained in the center of this block. And when we get to the hands-on training, I'll show you how you can line your material up with the laser head. But this is basically going to indicate where the laser is going to start processing your job. On the computers in the wood shop, I have never found this setting to not be in the center. So you just need to check yours at home and make sure when you process your file and you save it that you have the job origin set. And if anything looks strange when you go to frame up your job at the laser, that's one of the things you can check is make sure that no one has moved the job origin. The other thing I want to talk about is this drop-down box. It says user origin. There's a couple of other items. They're more advanced, but I do want to mention absolute coordinates. If someone has used the camera to line up their project on their board, it will change this to absolute coordinates. And if the person who used the camera last fails to change this setting, when you go to frame your job, it's not going to look right. So I'm just telling you all of this so that you know that if something does not look right, make sure you check and that this is set on user origin and the user origin is in the center of the job. And when we get to hands-on, it'll be a little bit easier to explain it and show you exactly what I mean. And while I'm going to take a little trail here and mention that we do have a camera installed on both of the lasers that does help you precisely line things up. And we can assist with training on using the camera. And we also have a rotary, which allows you to do glasses or anything, tumblers, anything that's cylindrical. So that does require separate training also. So just keep that in mind. And both of those, using both of those tools will affect the user origin. So you just want to keep that in mind. The last thing I want to mention is to encourage you to go to lightburn.com and read the documentation online. There's some really great documentation out there. It's very well written. It's easy to understand. It will go into greater depth of all of these tools that I've introduced you to in this video, and will help you in your journey to become more proficient at creating projects on the laser. Also, when you are sent the class materials, you receive some attachments. Please read those. The laser setup procedures that are printer friendly are nice to print out and have with you to use the first couple of times you use the laser so you don't forget the steps. I will go over that at the hands-on training, but it is kind of rushed because we get 4 people in there and we're just trying to go through the steps. So when you get to the laser for the first time on your own, you may hesitate as to what order things need to be done. If you take that list with you, that will help you tremendously. So I hope that this training has been helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the hands-on training.